the idea that you wouldn't bring the bar down is completely alien to me. I mean, everybody brings a bar down on a chairlift. Why wouldn't you? It seems kind of strange.
Welcome to the storm. I'm your host, Stuart Winchester. You know, I don't talk much about European skiing, except when I point out the fact that I understand very little about it. But let's hop the Atlantic today and hear from someone who actually knows what he's talking about. Before we cross that ocean, did you know you can now watch the Storm Skiing podcast on YouTube or on stormskiing.com? It is a really cool experience with some extra graphical goodies that will add some context to our conversations. So please hop over to YouTube and give us a follow at Storm Ski Journal. You can also follow the Storm on X or Instagram at Storm Ski Journal. And you can now rep the Storm by swinging into the Storm store at stormskiing.myshopify.com, where you can pick up a hat, a hoodie, a shirt, a sticker, and a bunch of other stuff. But for the full Storm experience and to best support the Storm's mission of independent ski journalism, please consider an upgrade to the paid tier of the Storm Skiing Journal and podcast, which will get you access to 100% of the Storm's written content, past, present, and future. Here's a little bonus. For a limited time, when you upgrade to the paid version of the Storm Skiing Journal and podcast, you will also get a free year of Slopes Premium. That is a $29.99 value, absolutely free. If you are not familiar with Slopes, it is an incredible ski tracking app. It compiles your stats by day, by trip, by season, or lifetime. Also very cool, real-time tracking of your friends while you're at the hill, and at many resorts, one-touch contact with Ski Patrol. If you want to try Slopes, you can claim a free premium day pass by clicking on the link in the article that accompanies this podcast on stormskiing.com. All right, time for episode 201 of the Storm Skiing Podcast. Iain Martin, host of the Ski Podcast. My guest today is the founder and host of the Ski Podcast, a UK-based show that is closing in on its 250th episode. He is also a freelance journalist, writing for national and specialized ski press, the owner of a digital marketing consultancy for snow sports, and the founder of Ski Flight Free, a lobby group that encourages skiers to reduce their carbon footprint. Iain Martin is my guest. Iain, welcome to the Storm. How you doing today? How's life over in the UK?
I'm very well, thank you, Stuart. And life in the UK today is really good because it's a beautiful sunny day outside. I live in Brighton on the south coast of the UK. And today I took a little winter dip in the sea just to wake myself up.
Amazing. So you're seeking out that cold even when it's across the continent is where your ski heart is. So let's talk about the European winter. We've had an outstanding winter to start here over in North America. In all regions, a lot of ski areas that haven't opened in a long time have opened, or haven't opened certain terrain in a long time have opened that terrain. What do things look like in Europe so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's still relatively early on in the season, but things started very well in Europe. We had quite a lot of good early snow. And then we've had fairly regular top-ups as the season has gone on. There was a really, really good snowstorm that affected most of the Alps just before Christmas, of about a meter of fresh snow came down. But there were high winds at that time as well. And unfortunately, that meant a lot of it, you think, oh, a meter of fresh snow, that's going to be a brilliant, that solved everything. But a lot of it got blown away at that time. But more recently, we've had some regular top-ups. So I would say the snow situation in Europe is good, generally across the board. Certainly very different from the last two Januaries that we've had, which were dry and in particular warm. This January has been cold, like proper cold in some cases. Now, I was out on the mountain, admittedly late December in Teen, where with wind chill, we're talking -20. And I know you get that sort of thing in the States and North America quite a lot, but you don't get that so often in Europe.
So you and I have something in common geographically, even though we're very far apart. We both live in places that are not thought to be ski meccas. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and you live in Brighton, which, I'm not sure where the closest skiing is to that, but I imagine it's a bit of a haul. But nonetheless, everywhere I go in the world, there's Brits. There, you guys travel and you know how to voyage. So, what does a typical ski season look like for you, Ian? How often are you able to get down to the Alps or wherever you go in Europe? And how is this season shaped up for you?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I love skiing like a lot of Brits. I mean, it's been in my blood for a long time. My parents met in a ski resort. I started skiing when I was young. I worked a few ski seasons when I was younger. And so now you mentioned earlier, I work as a journalist in the industry and running the podcast, and therefore I tend to do quite a few press trips. So normally I'm going to do, maybe five, and this winter six trips to the mountains this winter. And as it goes, I've done three of those already. I went out for the opening in Courchevel and Maribel in Les Trois Vallées. That would have been in early December. Went to go and look at a couple of new lifts that were opening over there as well. Then I took a family holiday, which was fantastic. We went to Teen at Christmas time. That is a ski area that links in with Val d'Isère. Met a lot of Americans during that trip who'd come over to enjoy Christmas in Europe, a lot of them staying over in Val d'Isère. And then most recently, I went on a shorter trip to Courmayeur and Chamonix. And listeners might be aware that they are effectively on either side of Mont Blanc. There's a tunnel that goes between the two that takes about 20 minutes to drive through. And you pop out from France into Italy and vice versa from Italy into France. So I've done pretty well so far this winter, and I'm going out the Dolomites in Italy next week. So a couple more trips to go.
Let's talk logistics. I'm curious how you get from Brighton down to Europe. And this ties into something that I referenced in the introduction, which is your ski flight free lobby group. And you had made a pledge actually in 2024 to not take any air travel skiing. And I hear a lot about, when I was younger, the Eurail pass was a thing and everyone would go to Europe and they travel around by train. But now we have these very cheap flights everywhere. So talk about how you move regularly between the UK and the Alps and how that ties into your lobby organization and your larger philosophy around travel and how skiers should look to get around.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I set up Ski Flight Free as a lobby group in 2019. It was evidently quite a big year. Someone called Greta Thunberg, cropped up on in the media that people may not have come across before. It's not like climate change and global warming is a new thing, but I wanted to try and bring more attention to the fact that you can significantly reduce the carbon footprint of your own ski holiday if you choose not to fly. And there have been lots of studies done. Protect Our Winters, I'm sure, is a group that you're familiar with. They have done analysis on the carbon cost of a holiday. And if you're coming from the UK, specifically, we're thinking about the UK, people typically fly. Most people are flying when they go to the Alps. And the carbon cost of that is going to represent 60 to 80% of the total carbon cost of the holiday. So, what I wanted to try and do is to demonstrate to people that actually it's not that difficult to travel by train, or if you go in a car and it's not just you driving on your own, then actually that's significantly lower than flying as well. So, in answer to hopefully that's answered the first part of your question. The second part of it is how do you do it, I think. And for me, from Brighton, on a typical journey out the Alps, I get a 6 o'clock train from the station just down the road here. I get into London St Pancras, and from London St Pancras, you take the Eurostar. And the Eurostar is a great high speed service that goes from London to Paris. I tend to get the 801. I've booked it so many times now. I know which one I'm on. You get into Paris, you arrive into Gare du Nord. You go into the metro system there, a couple of stops on the RER to Gare de Lyon, where your trains will take you on to Geneva or Zurich or Saint-Gervais if you're going to Chamonix, for example, or Bourg-Saint-Maurice if you were going to the Tarentaise, big ski resorts there like Courchevel, Maribel, Val d'Isère, etc. And that's how I do it, and essentially trying to demonstrate to most people that although on the face of it, it can be less expensive to fly, there's obviously the social cost involved, but these days, I don't know how it works in the States, but in Europe, you've got significant baggage fees. So you've got the cost of the flight, you've got the cost of your baggage fees, which can more than double it in a lot of cases. You've also got to get to and from the airport at either end as well. And if you take the train, normally you're arriving either right in the resort, in the case of places like, I don't know, Zermatt or Andermatt, or incredibly close to them with places like Les Arcs, Verbier, Courchevel, Maribel, Val d'Isère, etc.
Are you moving around with a ski bag, a boot bag, a suitcase? How do you travel?
I don't actually own any skis. I haven't owned
Oh,
skis for many years. I mean,
okay.
one of the sponsors of the ski podcast is a ski hire company, but
Mhm.
even if it were, I wasn't being supported by them, I probably wouldn't, own any skis until the point where I choose to live in a ski resort again. Then I'll
Mhm.
probably build up a quiver. But right now, if I hire from a hire shop, I can change my skis during the week. If I'm with the family, I can get a pair of piste skis or all mountain. If I know that the conditions are good, went to Verbier last year, got some big fat wide skis, because I knew I was going to be skiing off piste. When I went to Courchevel, I wanted to do some ski touring, so I got some specific ski touring skis. I can just change them around. I don't carry them. You could carry them on that journey, and plenty of people do it, but evidently it's an extra bag. I just
Yeah.
tend to have like one large bag that I've got my ski boots in, which I do have
Mhm.
ski boots.
Yeah, you have to own the boots. It's funny because America is very much this ownership society, and everyone wants to move around with their own skis and their own cars, right? So this notion of taking mass transit to a ski area is very, very foreign to most Americans. But I saw this amazing map that you had on your Ski Flight Free site that essentially looked like a subway map or a metro map of
Mm.
Paris, but
Yeah.
all the stops were different ski areas around the Alps. This just blew my mind. So I'm gonna assume that most skiers coming from North America are not going to come in through London and take the TGV. What are the best entry portals to come into Europe from where you can go airport, train, resort?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people, if they're flying in from the States, are probably going to be coming into Geneva or Zurich, would be my
Mhm.
guess for the main arrivals. And both of those, I mean, Switzerland has just an incredible rail network. It's such a joy to travel on the rail network in Switzerland. And so many of those Swiss resorts have railway stations in the resort itself, or they're one lift away. For example, with Verbier, you can take a train, depending on the day of the week, you can take a train direct from Geneva Airport to a station called Le Charblet, which is in the valley. Walk off the station, walk to a gondola, and get the gondola into a resort. If you go to Zermatt, then it's train all the way. You're probably aware there are no cars in Zermatt.
Mhm.
The train literally takes you into the resort itself, and then there are lots of little electric taxis which will take you on to your final destination. Andermatt, part of the Vale Resorts Collective railway station right in the center of resort. So in Switzerland and those two destinations, very, very straightforward. I don't know if you have international flights, seems unlikely from the States into Innsbruck. But Innsbruck is extremely well connected with most of the Austrian resorts as well. Probably you're going to be flying to Munich, in which case, yeah, you could certainly travel by train to Austria in a fairly straightforward manner. You're probably going to have more changes perhaps involved from Munich.
A defining characteristic of North American skiing, particularly in the United States West, is this massive ski traffic around some of our more densely populated ski regions, the Wasatch in Utah, I-70 in Colorado, Lake Tahoe. It, taken as a whole, and I realize the Alps are humongous, the train system combined with the gondolas and the taxis and all these other things you just described, does that do a pretty good job for the most part of mitigating what we would think of as ski traffic and of letting people flow through the mountains fairly easily?
Yeah. Um, I tend not to ski during February holidays, February
Okay.
half term. That is the busiest time of year. The French have their vacances scolaires. They tend to spread it out over 3 weeks. So different regions of France have their holidays at different times, but that 3 week period can be really busy. In
Mhm.
Italy, it's just one week. In Switzerland, you don't really notice it in particular. In Austria, yeah, it's busier. If you go in those peak weeks in the middle of February, when it's carnival time, it can be busier. Most of the rest of the time, the lift systems are very good and they're very empty. I was in Cormier, I guess the week before last, so early January. That is quite a popular resort in Italy. People will drive there from Milan and from Turin. It has a reputation as being quite shishi. Slopes were empty and it was a
Yeah.
joy. They were groomed and empty, and you could ski fast, which I don't often feel comfortable doing that if there's quite a few people around. So I think the answer to your question is avoid the middle of February. That's when I would not go, and otherwise, I don't think you'll see an issue at all.
A lot of you click into this podcast to hear from the best minds in skiing, because that's the whole point of this thing. But what if you want to find one of these great leaders for your own mountain team? Well, let me tell you about my friends at Profile Search International, the ski industry talent acquisition experts. They are the only executive search and recruitment firm in the world that is 100% focused on the ski industry. Profile Search has used their intimate understanding of skiing and related industries and of available candidates worldwide to place hundreds of transformational leaders at the best and most progressive ski areas over the past 30 years. With offices in the US and Canada, Profile Search finds and negotiates with the right leaders for your team. You can reach out to them directly at profilesearch.com, or contact them by email or phone, or send me a note and I will connect you directly with this expert team. All right, back to Iain. All right, help us understand Europe. Give us some Europe 101 skiing here, because it's just on such a gigantic scale. And I don't know how many ski areas there are in Europe, but it looks like there's thousands, and I see all kinds of different numbers, and it's hard to even define what a ski area is in Europe. So to the extent you can, Iain, give us a broad overview of how many ski areas are there in Europe? And if you can, just take us through the different regions and the different places, because we always think, of course, of the Alps and the big four in Austria and Italy and Switzerland and France, but there's much, much more clearly to Europe and skiing. So can you give us the global or continental map?
Yeah, well, that is a big question and a big area. Evidently, you said there's thousands of resorts. So I reckon there's probably 3 or 4 thousand resorts by the time you add them up. I mean, we were talking earlier in the green room about mom and pop resorts and community resorts, and there are a lot of community resorts. If you want to define a ski resort as anywhere that's got a lift, there's a whole bunch of places where they've got one lift, and so they come into that list. But if you're a tourist, you are thinking about predominantly going from, let's say, west to east, the French Alps, the Swiss Alps, the Austrian Alps, and then the Italian Alps going down to the Dolomites, which is or is not the Alps, depending how you want to define it, and then a bit further east as well to Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, etc. as well. Typically, if you wanted to generalize, and there's no way of answering this question without generalizing, you're going to see higher ski areas further to the west, decreasing as you go towards the east.
Okay.
But you can ski in Scandinavia. In more recent years, lots of people have been skiing in Norway and in Sweden. You can ski in the Pyrenees. There's a mountain range there between France and Spain, which I've skied in several times before. And there are all sorts of other quirky places that you wouldn't imagine you could possibly ski. Like there's a place called the Sierra Nevada, which is right in the south of Spain, most southerly ski area in Europe. You can be on the beach in the morning and skiing in the afternoon if you wanted to. You could ski in Corsica, island in the middle of the Mediterranean. I am going skiing in Sicily, right on the southern tip of Italy next month. You can ski in Greece. There, I've skied in the Apennines in the middle of Italy, much closer to Rome and Naples than it is to the Alps. So wherever there's a bit of altitude with a fair wind, snow as well, you can ski. But the main areas, evidently, France, Switzerland, Austria, Italy.
One thing that's always tough for me is figuring out what a ski area even means in Europe.
Yeah.
We have on the Icon Pass Dolomiti Super Ski, on the Epic Pass, excuse me, I don't speak French, La Four Valleys or whatever, how you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Those are bucketed as destinations, but when you look at the map, it's a bunch of ski resorts. So help us understand how we should think about ski areas, ski resorts, ski holidays as far when we try to determine when I go to Dolomite Super Ski, should I try to check off all 12 of these? What does that even what does a ski area even mean in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, some of these ski areas are very big. Yeah, Les
Mhm.
Trois Vallées, the largest ski area in the world, 600 kilometers of piste. Uh, I think probably by definition, it means they're all linked by lifts and you can get
Mhm.
to and from. I think it's more a question of what you're thinking about is where you're going to stay. In the Three Valleys, entirely achievable to ski the whole area. If you start early in the morning, you can ski all of the different resorts in a single day. There's a
Yeah.
challenge out there and you can do it.
Yeah.
More difficult to do that in the Dolomites because geographically they're further spread out. But there is a route called the Sella Ronda where you can ski a lot of them in a circle around the Dolomites as well. If you went to Verbier, again, very achievable to ski in all of those different areas. So if you if the answer to your question is, how do you think of them? I would say just think of them as, huge interconnected ski areas that you can access with a single pass. In terms of where you want to stay, then I would probably want to find out more about the individuals. I've got a feeling that with Verbier on the Epic Pass, you might have to stay in Verbier in certain accommodations to be able
Yeah,
to get that.
there's accommodation restrictions with Epic. Icon doesn't have any of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with Icon, you've got Chamonix and Zermatt, and in the last few
Hmm.
years, definitely seen and heard so many more Americans in both of those two
Okay.
resorts who I believe are taking advantage of the Icon Pass. And Chamonix, in fact, is probably an exception to those other areas because it is iconic. It
Mhm.
has Mont Blanc, Western Europe's highest mountain there, and some incredible lifts and skiing. But that lift area does not connect. It's like five different ski areas that are
All
not
right.
interconnected at all. And so there's a bit more schlep involved in your day, but in my opinion, thoroughly worth it. And you get the payback of, an incredible town that's been there for way longer than the lifts were there. I mean, you probably know the first Winter Olympics were there in 1924. It's got a long history.
How do we even begin to make sense of something like that? Because when Chamonix joined the Icon Pass, I was trying to figure that out because the tram to Midi or whatever was not included, but
Yeah.
what are the sources of local knowledge, websites, guides? How do you even begin to make sense of, a ski area that is the size of every ski area in Colorado combined?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be like Les Trois Vallées or something like that.
Hmm.
I think you just have to get out there and ski it and enjoy it. And one of the great things about Les Trois is very accessible. Like most of those big areas, they're not restricted to the best skiers. Most of them are easily accessible for most intermediates. There are evidently more challenging areas that you can take on, but most of them are pretty accessible. You just got to go out and explore it really and find out what works for you. I mean, if you're only coming for a short period of time and you want to get the most out of it, you're going to Chamonix. Yeah, some research in advance. There's plenty of good websites out there which give you an indication of the different areas and how you might want to prioritize them.
So how many ski areas, however many there are, how many have you been to in Europe?
I have been asked that question before, and there is some app somewhere where you can like pick them off. I literally don't know. I would guess 150 or
Yeah.
something like that. Telling me what is the app called where I can check it?
Slopes, you can track your ski days and it will record all the different resorts you've been to and give you a total on those. But I have
Right. Well,
not used it in Europe, so I don't know how it counts resorts over there.
okay. Well, I will do that after this podcast. My guess would be 150. I mean, I have been to a number of ski resorts in summer, and not in winter. Does that count? I don't know. I've been to a couple of ski resorts where I haven't skied. I've actually been to the ski resort for meetings and things like
Mhm.
that. So, does that count? I don't know the answer to that either. What I do know is there's so many more to explore down the track that I'm, never going to cross them all off my list.
All right, let's talk about weather. So huge range of ski areas, all the way from the Pyrenees up to Nordic countries and in the Alps. In North America, we have these weird little weather pockets, places you'd never expect it, where you get lake effect snow, or like northern Vermont, for example, gets twice the snow as the rest of New England. So conditions tend to be a lot better there, but it's not something that would be obvious to you if you didn't follow that scene. So to the extent that you can you take us through these different regions or identify some of these microclimates where we might find the best snow or how they're different and how the weather patterns might be different. Whatever you can tell us is a broad overview of the weather.
Well, I can tell you as someone who receives press releases from many, many ski resorts at the beginning of the season, that most of them claim that they've got a microclimate. Like, I still haven't come across a resort who doesn't want to claim they've got their own microclimate, or in relation to their position in the valley and things like that. So I don't really know if I can answer that, other than to maybe share a couple of my favorites, which are less well known. There's a ski resort called Les Contamines. If you were in Chamonix and you had the Mont Blanc Unlimited Pass, instead of being in Chamonix, you went down the hill, went past a resort called Saint Gervais, and up a small valley. It basically abuts up to Mont Blanc on one side and Saint Gervais on the other side, and it's a snow trap. And my friends would probably be really unhappy that I would be, sharing this, because that's where they go. They're locals, and that's where they go to get their powder, because it's not a big resort. It doesn't get skied out. It's a fantastic little genuine microclimate. And there are other ski resorts as well that have snow depths higher than others. There's one called Flen, which is similar on the way to Chamonix, just off the valley there. Not particularly high, but again, does appear to have the microclimate that they claim to have, that gives it, higher snow depths than elsewhere. But overall, it's probably too much of a generalization to be able to say like where does get the snow and where doesn't get the snow.
Mhm. I tend to see a lot of big snow totals coming out of Austria, and I don't know if that's just selective bias or something, but if you look at a US map, Utah and Colorado, they're right there. You would assume they get the same snow, but Utah gets a lot more. So are there countries that tend to get more snow?
No, I'm definitely not going to say that. It would be nice to say, oh yeah, Austria gets more snow, but
Hmm.
there just isn't enough of a generalization there to be able to say that. I mean, in recent years, there has been a lot of conversation about Scandinavia being more reliable. I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier about how in January, the last couple of years, has been not only dry, not much snowfall, but warm. And that has caused significant problems, in terms of the mainstream media coverage of purely man-made snow, strips of
Hmm.
snow in the mountains, incredibly bad PR for the industry overall. Whereas Scandinavia hasn't suffered from this. It's not as high up there, but snowfall is more reliable. And there is a sense, particularly within the UK market, of people choosing to go, an increasing number of people choosing to go to Norway, for example. A bit more expensive on the ground, it has a reputation for being an expensive country, but actually, the reliability compensates for that, and the basic package of the holiday is no more than somewhere in France or Austria at peak half term time, but you could be sure that you're going to get some snow.
And how are the crowds up there in Norway, Sweden, Finland?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't skied there myself, but talking to
Mhm.
people, I've interviewed plenty of people on the podcast about it before, and yeah, no crowds, even in half term.
So let's talk about some of those media headlines, and those tend to drive the climate change narrative, which I think is very different in the Alps than it is in the Rockies. The Rockies are pretty high and have a much different weather pattern that they're working with. So you've been skiing, I believe, in the Alps since the 70s. So you've had firsthand
Yeah.
point of view and you're there all the time. What's the general trend of climate change? I've seen some big headlines of ski areas closing explicitly because of it in the Alps, a select few, over the past couple of years. But give us your perspective on climate change and its current impact on the Alps.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that it is having an impact. Those headlines about ski resorts closing are a bit hyperbolic. They're slightly premature because we're talking about some of those community resorts where they have one lift and they've decided, look, it's not economic for us to run this lift anymore. We're not going to do it. It doesn't affect a huge amount of skiers. The majority of ski resorts are not in that situation, but equally, they are very mindful of the fact that what we've seen over the last few years, and even this season, uh, which has been better than the last two, but we still see that that snow rain line, the freezing point, is getting higher up the mountain. So, skiers hate rain, right? None of us
Yeah.
like rain. Rain destroys snow. It's not nice to be in, and it's all right knowing it might be snowing higher up. But that rain level, the snow rain level, is getting higher, and that means that lower slopes are less reliable that they're going to, give you snow. And for ski resorts at a lower altitude, this is a serious issue. And there's plenty of evidence out there which shows that the number of snow days across the season is diminishing, and that snow line is getting higher. So it's an existential issue for the industry, and consequently, ski resorts are taking it extremely seriously and are making a lot of effort to highlight that and to lobby within their own countries to try and get changes made.
There's been a big push towards snowmaking, even at some higher elevation resorts over here. Are you seeing more of an emphasis on snowmaking in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, snowmaking, sure. I think I did an interview with someone the other day and he asked me if snowmaking was essential for ski resorts. And I said for every ski resort now, snowmaking is a crucial part of their strategy.
Mhm.
Early in the season, as soon as the temperature gets low enough, the snow cannons will be on. When I was in Courmayeur last week, even though they've got pretty decent snow right now, it was below freezing and the selected snow cannons were on. In fact, they told me there's a combination of using technology at the same time. They can analyze using lasers from the snow groomers or from drones to assess where the slope is likely to lose its snow first, and then use those snow cannons selectively. But back in December, when I was in Teen, again, we just had a meter of snow, but it was sub-zero. They had snow cannons on because they want to ensure that those slopes will be skiable. And those snow cannons, some of them are getting higher. I mean, there's a resort called Les Deux Alpes in southern French Alps, which has glacier skiing where you can ski in the summer as well. And they have more recently installed snow cannons there to help ensure that. And
Yeah.
a lot of the work being done by ski resorts is looking at insurance for the future as best as they can.
For all the differences between North American and European skiing, here's one thing they have in common. At some point, you are going to have to deal with some freezing weather. And if you're anything like me, the first thing to turn into blocks of ice will be your feet. Unless you do what I did and start rocking Hotronix ski boot foot warmers and heated socks. Now, when I'm booting up for the day, I plug in my batteries, I head out into the elements, and I forget all about my formerly problematic feet. I've been on the heated boot warmers for years, but lately I've really become heated sock bro. And a big reason for that is that unlike with your big funky ski boots, you can pull out the heated socks for any part of an active outdoor lifestyle. For me, that's tailgating, cold weather bike riding, running errands around the neighborhood, taking my kids to the park, anytime I'm outside for an extended period in the cold. And Hotronics technology just keeps getting better. This latest generation of Hotronics gear has a larger footprint, but smaller, more anatomical batteries that last up to 18 hours. And they are all Bluetooth enabled and manageable from an app on your smartphone. Stop enduring the elements. Fight back instead with Hotronics ski boot foot warmers and needed socks. You can click the link in the banner on the podcast article to get started. All right, back to Iain. So let's talk about lifestyle and the ski experience here a little bit, Iain. So I'll give you my European stereotype, and then you tell me how it really is. So what we always hear is the Europeans like the long runs. They like the pistes. They don't like to go off piste in general. They like to stop in and have a long lunch and have some wine. And per capita, the skier visits are a lot higher in France, Austria, Germany, Italy, Switzerland than they are in the United States. We get a lot of skier visits, but we have a lot of people, right? So you have it more baked into the lifestyle, it seems. That's my stereotype. Now, what's reality?
Yeah, well, perhaps I would surprise you by saying that I wouldn't say that skiing or snow sports is baked into European continental countries. They are seeing some of the same challenges that you're seeing in the States that we're definitely seeing in the United Kingdom, in that the skier population is aging, is maturing, and there isn't necessarily this group of young people who are coming in as, people are living longer and they're staying fitter longer so they can ski for longer. Yet that new generation isn't necessarily coming through. And alpine countries such as Switzerland and Austria are seeing this as well. And there are all sorts of initiatives in place to try and encourage young people to get on the slopes. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that it's such a huge part of their culture. And you referred to the number of skier days, for example, in the different countries. But don't forget that those skier days are boosted, for example, in France by a really large number of skiers coming from the UK, coming from the Netherlands, coming from Belgium, coming from Sweden, who ski in those big areas in the Alps. So it's from that point of view, it may not be what you expect. From the cultural point of view, what you were saying about enjoying the longer lunches and the dining, I have some experience of skiing in the States, but not recently. And I don't. There's certainly a very, very wide um, selection of mountain restaurants that can range from the basic kind of cafe type places to top gastronomy. I was in Val d'Isere recently at La Folie Douce, which you might have heard of. It's a on mountain restaurant where they also have DJs and a cabaret. They've got 5 restaurants there. You can go to the takeaway self-service restaurant and get yourself some really good food, or you could do incredibly fine dining on the mountain at 2,200 meters of altitude. And there are plenty of other mountain restaurants like that. And yes, I would say the Continentals, not necessarily the British, that's part of their culture. Personally, I always ski through lunch because it's much quieter. You can have any queues, you can get on all the lifts, and then when
Yeah.
everyone else has finished in the mountain restaurants, then you can go there and get yours.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the queues. Let's talk about a few cultural differences. So lift lines in North America tend to be very orderly. I've skied a little in Europe. It tends to be an off time, so I've not experienced the mad lift queues that I hear there are here. It's sort of a fight for your life. So talk about lift queuing in Europe and what the reality is and how if we should take an offensive posture when we get in line because Americans tend to be very like, okay, I'll wait my turn.
I think the British might be a bit like that as well. But you're right. I mean, we know or hear about how in the States, for example, say you've got a 6-man chair, you're not going to have only 4 people going up on that chair, right? Where that is like a continual frustration in Europe, where only 2 people go or 3 people go, despite the fact
Yeah.
that you've got a massive queue. That lift, incredibly fast lifts, lots of great lifts, detachable quads and 6-man, 8-man chairs around Europe, but not necessarily full. I wouldn't say that you need to, you know, push your way around, but it's way less formalized. And certainly when I was a kid, I used to kind of wheedle my way in the
Uh,
queue, and there's probably kids who do that now. So if you're an American coming over, I don't think you need to kind of prepare yourself for some kind of a scrum, but you need to be mindful it's a little bit more uh, open and not quite as controlled as in the States.
it mirrors my experience. I've driven quite a bit in Europe, and it's a much more assertive culture than America, except in New York City where I live. So I have to know where I am because I grew up in Michigan, which is very orderly. And if I try to do the things I do in New York City, there they don't work. In Europe, they work just fine. So on the other end of the spectrum, once you get on the lift, the United States has some really weird cultural things. In the West, they don't like the safety bar. I don't know why. It's sort of a macho thing. It's stupid. In Europe and in parts of the US, it just comes down, boom. And you can always tell when you're on the chair with the Euro because they just bring it down and they don't say anything. In America, when I do bring it down, I'm always like bar coming down. Europe's they'll just bang you. So that again, maybe I'm stereotyping too much. So talk about that bar culture there and the sort of expectation around it.
Well, I mean, the idea that you wouldn't bring the bar down is completely alien to me. I mean, everybody brings a bar down on a chairlift. Why wouldn't you? It seems kind of strange. It's interesting that I'd not really known that about the States. Maybe more of a libertarian kind of culture over there. But the bar would always come down. You mentioned about driving. Certainly, I've tried to avoid, generalizations during our conversation just now. But you probably could generalize and say that the lift queuing culture does ally slightly to the driving. So in Austria, it might be a bit more orderly. Well, in fact, I'm going to say in Austria, it's a lot more orderly than it is in Italy.
Okay.
I don't know if you've driven in Italy, but it can be
Yes.
quite chaotic over there. And the lift queuing, would be more like that as well.
So it's funny because if you go ski out west in the Midwest, a lot of the chairs, hundreds of them, still don't have bars. The new lifts have to have them, and a lot of times folks don't use them. I always do, whether they want to or not. But just prepare yourself for that. If you go to a place that's a little bit off the grid in the United States, they may not have bars. So a lot of Americans, as you said, are being exposed to these big famous European names through our mass market multi-mountain epic and icon passes who have been very deliberately adding some of these big names onto their offerings, and the Indy Pass has now as well. I don't know though if it's worth it because you can still, from my understanding and the prices I see online, walk up to the ticket window at nearly any European resort and get a lift pass for the equivalent of around $100 a day-ish. Whereas in America, it might cost three times that. So talk about the lift tickets in Europe and how folks coming from North America to Europe ought to think about this. And if maybe an Icon or Epic Pass, if you're buying it just to come to Europe, maybe that's not necessary. Maybe you're better off just going to the ticket window.
Yeah, I think you might have a point there. I can't recall off the top of my head exactly. I know that the price point changes for Icon and Epic depending when you buy it. If you get it early on, it's less expensive. But you're right. I think if you were only buying it to ski 1 week and one area in Europe, you'd probably find you'd be better off because we don't have as much dynamic pricing as you have in the States, whereby the lift price is going to change depending on when you buy it prior to going. It will be cheaper if you buy it online. Typically, normally there's a discount, but often there isn't even any difference there between buying it in advance and buying it on the day. I think really the big advantage of Icon and Epic are if you're skiing in the States and you're doing a trip to Europe at the same time as well. There are some deals where you can buy your lift ticket packaged through the hotel. I went to Cromontana a few years ago where we just bought our lift ticket on a daily basis, and so there was one day when the weather was bad So actually, I still went out, but my wife and kids, didn't go out.
That's me.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
didn't go out that day, and instead of buying like a 6-day ticket for X, we bought 5 individual tickets, and it worked out less. So there is flexibility there like that. There's most European resorts don't really offer that kind of 5 in 6 kind of deal. You either buy a 1-day, 2-day, 3-day, 6-day pass. So if you're going to places and you want to do a bit of traveling, or if you're in Chamonix or Zermatt, where there's so many things that you can do as a non-skier, you might be better off buying them individually.
It's interesting what you say about hearing a lot more American voices at the resorts that have been added to the Epic and Icon Pass. And what these big passes do is they essentially create a menu that you can choose from and maybe areas you wouldn't have thought of before. I'm really curious about the reaction from your side of the Atlantic as more Americans have started to travel over here, and specifically as Vail Resorts has actually purchased 2 ski areas in Switzerland, Crans Montana and Andermatt-Sedrun. Is there fear of a negative impact? Are people indifferent? Is there been any sort of cultural worries about the clashing of the American capitalist style with with the European lifestyle? What has been the general reaction as we've seen this American
Yeah.
invasion?
Okay. So I guess there's 2 ways to answer this question. One is in terms of the consumer, and most consumers are not even aware of it.
Okay.
As far as they're concerned, or maybe they heard some Americans, there's some Americans in town, they got no idea that Vail Resorts have bought Cromontana or Andermatt, or that any of these changes are going in place. However, within the industry, I speak to lots of people in the industry. I've interviewed people about the acquisitions of Cromontana and Andermatt, and it's creating a massive stir within
Mm,
the industry. There is, on the one hand, there's this group of the kind of nevers, who I'm sure you're much more familiar with in the States, who think that anything to do with Vail Resorts is evil. And, in Zermatt, excuse me, in Andermatt, they're going to be serving burgers instead of, you won't be able to get, I don't know, a rusty or cheese on the mountain anymore. These sort of things like that, about how the quality of the product is going to change. I don't, to my mind, see that it's about that. I see that there's Vail Resorts are looking and thinking, okay, there's Europeans who are going to come over to the States, and now they're much more likely to come to one of our resorts. And if you've got, people who are Epic Pass holders, for example, in the States who are going to Europe, they're much more likely to go to Andermatt and Montana. And both of those, are great resorts, really good ski resorts, which, the actual deal has been really complicated to get those over the line, because the structure in European ski resorts is completely different from the States. In the States, you typically got one company that runs the lifts, the ski school, the mountain restaurants, the ski hire, whereas you've got loads and loads of different stakeholders in a ski resort in Europe, typically. Now, there are some resorts where their structure is a little different, and there's a lot of conversation about whether those resorts will be next on the list. We've discussed in the podcast before, Vail Resorts evidently had a conversation with Verbier about a possible acquisition. There were town hall meetings about it, and it's not progressed. There's another ski resort in Switzerland called Lux, where the ownership structure would work. It would suit. We don't know anything yet. There's a very large ski company in Europe called Compagnie des Alpes. It's kind of the equivalent of Vail Resorts, but they only own 10 ski resorts, but they're still the largest ski resort operator in Europe. And a team recently left, or they have announced their intention to leave Compagnie des Alpes in 2026.
mm,
That's quite surprising. Immediately,
yeah.
the conversation is, well, are they trying to position themselves so that they can be bought by Vail Resorts down the
Hmm.
track? I interviewed someone from the deputy mayor, who told me, no, it's about being able to have more control over when they open the lifts and things like this. Every single time there's some question over with different resorts. If a contract is coming to an end, La Plan, the contract for the lift company is coming to an end in 2026, I believe, and there's I've heard rumors about people being interested in an acquisition there. So within the industry, I think there's a huge amount of interest there, particularly when you think that a lot of these resorts, a large amount of them are owned and or run by third, maybe fourth generations of families because they only started like in the States, after the Second World War in the 50s or so. And maybe they're looking for, some kind of exit.
So if a resort doesn't get bought by Vail, they could also team up, right? And that's what Altera essentially did is it assembled the Icon
Yeah.
Pass. They bought a bunch of resorts, but they have a lot of partnerships as well. Have you seen much proliferation of the multi-mountain pass model in Europe? And are any of these products worthwhile for tourists to consider? Because I'm telling you, I told you earlier on your podcast, if you're coming over here from Europe, buy a multi-mountain pass or sell your house
Yeah.
to afford it. It is insane over here if you don't have a
Yeah.
pass. Different over there. So his multi-mountain pass caught on.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly starting to. There's probably the one that's best known is one called Magic Pass, which predominantly covers Swiss resorts. And I would probably liken it to of the multi passes you have in the States to maybe the Indy Pass. There's a lot more smaller resorts that you could base yourself in the Valais area of Switzerland and visit lots of these. They might not sustain you for more than a day or a couple of days in a lot of cases, but it's tremendous value for money. It's way less than everything else, and the resorts involved are getting a good deal out of it. In Austria, there's a, a large selection of relatively small passes that you can buy that will cover anything from 5 to 20 different ski areas. If you were going to Innsbruck, there's a really good pass there which will cover all of the kind of tourist sites in Innsbruck as well as the ski resorts in the area. If your question was, is that what an American visitor should get? I'd say Magic Pass probably not because it's not going to give you the type of skiing that you're looking for on a trip to Europe in all probability. If you wanted to head to Austria, you could get there's one called the Big Five or something like that, which covers all the big glaciers that glacier skiing, high skiing around Innsbruck, or that Innsbruck ski pass. Both of those would work quite well for basing yourself and using a hire car, and if you wanted to explore a couple of places.
Just anecdotally to flip that around a little bit, are you seeing any interest among European skiers in these American passes, both to use on the continent? You can go to Japan with them, or to come to North America to ski, which is obviously a much different ski experience. Are you seeing those start to catch on a little more mainstream, maybe in the UK or anywhere on the continent?
Yeah, the volume is very low at the moment.
Mm.
I mean, it is interesting. We have one big consumer show every year called the London Snow Show, and Icon have had a big stand there the last couple of
Mhm.
years, and they're evidently, letting people increasing awareness of what the Icon Pass is, what you can get out of it, and there is a big interest. Minority, but increasing number of people going over to Japan. I've got a bunch of friends, in Japan right now, very
Yeah.
jealous looking at their pictures of the incredibly deep snowpack over in Hakuba at the moment. But for someone like that, yeah, volume's low, but I could see them, buying, one of the passes that's going to cover their skiing in Japan and Europe and possibly the States. There aren't that many people who are taking 2 or 3 big trips like that every year.
Yeah. All right, let's go to bucket list here. I've personally skied in Europe, very limited. I've skied at Zermatt and Turbinia. As you know, they're right next to each other in Italy and Switzerland, which is kind of cool. You can ski back and forth between the two countries. Give us your 5 ski areas. If someone from North America can only make it over to Europe once in their life or a couple times in their life, what are your 5 that you'd say gotta hit these or more? That's an arbitrary number, but what are the ones we
Yeah.
have to see?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned several of them already, and I have a certain bias. I mean, I guess so that's what you're asking me. Where do I like the most? I mean, Chamonix and Zermatt are my 2 favorites,
Mhm.
and they are already very visited by Americans. They've got so much more than just the skiing. I mean, they do have great skiing, You mentioned in Zermatt, you can ski over to Italy. You can enjoy that Italian cultural side of things as well. But they have so much of that history there and the iconic mountains, Mont Blanc and then the Matterhorn in Zermatt. In Zermatt in particular, the resort is incredibly pretty. It is so scenic. You know, if you haven't been to the Alps and you want to see that those quintessential chalet buildings, those beautiful views, it's really good. Both resorts work for um, mul groups of differing abilities. You know, my brother went to Zermatt at Christmas. His wife didn't actually ski. You know, she was there. There's plenty of things you can do: hiking, snowshoeing, just hanging around the town itself. And in Chamonix, loads of things. I was there last weekend. You could go up the Aiguille de Midi if you want to, taking you up to 3,800 meters. Go up Montanvert, which I did, which is a rack and pinion railway, takes you up to overlook the Mer de Glace, which is the longest glacier in France. There's actually a gondola, which is one of the things I was reporting on that they fitted, which will take you down to the glacier, and then you can go into an ice cave, which is amazing. They've carved it out of the glacier, and you can go through that. Incredible experience. Now, it took me, I think I spent 3 hours on that round trip. You know, that's not a day where you're probably going to be doing any or much skiing as well, but you're getting a lot out of it. And Chamonix itself, it's not as pretty in a traditional way as Zermatt is, but there's still a huge amount going on there. It's incredibly active. You'll see a lot of tourists, but you'll also see some really hardcore skiers and mountaineers with the ropes, you know, and everything hanging off them. So I love those two. Again, maybe not that original, but Verbier, you know, if you're an advanced skier, you know, there is some fantastic skiing. Take a guide, go off the back of Montfort, the off-piste up there, or the back country, however you want to describe it, is just brilliant. You know, and it's reliable for good conditions as well. I mentioned the Three Valleys. It's a huge, huge ski area. I mentioned before I did several ski seasons. I did four of them in the Three Valleys, one in Courchevel, three in Maribel. And you know, I worked there for whatever that is, 80 weeks, and you know, I was never bored skiing. There is stuff for advanced skiers. There's a lot of intermediate kind of cruising around the place, but it's just the scale of the area. I took a friend there who's Australian one year, and he just went up to the first ridge, and he said, "It's like, you know, half a dozen thread bows, you know, laid end to end here."
Yeah.
Just the scale of it is incredible. So I'm a big fan of that as well. And then, you know, if I wanted to come up with something, another place I have a kind of a soft spot for, which is completely different, but again, maybe more suitable. Well, definitely more suitable for the advanced skiers who are looking for something, you know, different and more challenging. You could go and visit a very small resort in the southern French Alps called La Grave.
Mm-hmm.
And La Grave only has one lift that goes up through the middle and then a lot of steep descents off there, which you would do with a guide. And, you know, I've had some amazing skiing there. It's a tiny, tiny little place. You know, there's like half a dozen places that you can stay, but it's core, you know, it would be for an advanced skier a tremendous time. And you could do a week there if you had a guide who wanted to take you to lots of different areas. Probably, you know, a longer weekend, 3 or 4 days would be enough.
Talk about the guiding culture in general, because even in Trevino, which is not necessarily a super hazardous ski area, we hired a guide to take us, you know, below that big dam they have and into all these cool things and down these chutes and couloirs. And almost everyone, basically everyone stayed on the piste. That's much different than North America, where the boundaries are the boundaries and you can go anywhere. And if you go out of the gates, you're kind of on your own. In general, what I've heard is if you're going to go off piste in Europe, you're better off hiring a guide. What's your take on that?
Well, personally, I've done plenty of skiing off piste
Okay.
without a guide, historically. Um, and I guess it depends where it is you're skiing and how experienced you are, and you know what you're doing. Evidently, anytime you go off piste into the backcountry, there's a risk that comes with that, right? And you have to make those decisions. And if I'm going to a place that I'm not familiar with, and I know there's all sorts of caveats attached with that, you know, there could be a slope that I've skied down, you know, dozens of times
Yeah.
before that will be completely different when I ski it today. But if I'm going to an area I'm not familiar with, I want to be doing it with a guide who knows where they're taking me. And I would feel much more comfortable with that. I mean, we've had, I'm sure it happens in the States on a regular basis, but, there were 5 avalanche deaths on today is Thursday, on Tuesday of this week in Europe. Those skiers had transceivers, beacons, some of them had airbags as well. They were experienced skiers, but we know that conditions can be unpredictable. So I would typically seek to minimize my risk by employing a guide who's likely to know the area better than me.
All right, Ian, let's finish on this. Yes, we all know the headline ski areas, but if people were to ask me, for example, where in the US is really unique, I tell them Mad River Glen, which runs the last single chair in the continental United States up in Vermont, Mount Bohemia in Michigan, which makes no snow, allows no beginners, has no grooming. I'd send them to Idaho, which everyone has heard of Sun Valley, but there's a lot of ski areas that get 300 inches of snow a year, are as big or bigger than Sun Valley, and will give you a great ski experience on empty hills. So, what are some off the radar areas, maybe smaller, maybe quirkier, that stand out to you that you would say if you want a different experience, if you want to go to Europe and not just go to the Chamonix and the place that everyone else does, where would you send us?
Well, I mean, I can't think of any others quite like what you talked about there, where they ban snowboarding or beginners or anything
Yeah.
like that. I mean, La Grave that I already mentioned is quirky for
Mhm.
sure. It's not like anywhere else. It offers really good skiing and only a kind of single lift into that area. But there are all sorts of ski areas, if you want to put them that, in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. If you were coming over from the States just on a week's holiday, would you want to kind of fit them into your trip? I'm not so sure, but if you're on a sustained period of time, it could be good. I think I might have mentioned before, I skied in the Apennines, which is that strip of mountains that goes down the middle of Italy.
Mhm.
There's a ski resort there called Roccarazzo, and most of the people who ski there are day trippers from Rome and from
Mhm.
Naples. It's pretty quiet. Midweek, there's like zero people there at all. And we did that as a family and combined it with a trip to Naples. So we went to Naples. We saw an amazing city, incredible culture there. Went to Pompeii while we were there, which is just next door to Naples, and then did 4 days skiing in Roccarazzo. Completely different from it, and yeah, they've got 100 kilometers apiece across the areas there, so it's pretty good. Um, in the UK, there are all sorts of very quirky places that you could ski. I mean, you have ski resorts in Scotland, and I've skied in a few of those. But when we have snow, which doesn't happen so often, that there's certain places in the UK where they have those rope tows
Yeah.
that spark up. If they've got snow, there'll be a Facebook group. They'll say, "Oh, it's looking good. Okay, we're going to turn on the generator tomorrow, and we're going to start the rope tow." And you get 80 people turning up there in the Lake District or the Peak District or northern England in Northumbria. Those sort of
Wow.
places I've never been to. I'd need a lot of luck to be able to ski there. I think if you live in the area, you could do that. And places that you wouldn't imagine you could ski. I may have mentioned before, I'm going to Sicily next month. So the plan is, and we'll be going ski touring on Mount Etna. So that is a live volcano, but it's not just ski touring. They have lifts there as well.
Yeah.
They've got a couple of chairlifts there on the north and south side of Etna. So if you're going to, I know a lot of Americans, like to travel in Italy. They've been to Sicily, stay in Taormina, which is very close to Etna, and just hire some skis for a day and go skiing on Etna on a live volcano.
Incredible. Ian, this has been, I might market this one as my Europe 101 podcast because it's the best orientation to European skiing that I've ever come across is from you today. So thank you very much. I think my listeners are really going to enjoy this. And it really makes me believe that I am long overdue for a return ski trip to Europe. So maybe I'll meet up with you over there at some point, or maybe you'll make your way over here. But yeah, either way, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time today.
It's a pleasure, Stuart. And if you do come over, please do let me know because even if I can't make it with you, I'll do everything I can to be able to help smooth your trip.
I
Thanks very much for
appreciate that.
inviting me on.
And And that's Ian Martin, host of the Ski Podcast. That was so much fun, Ian. Thank you so much for breaking down EuroSki for us. I need to make it back over there in the wintertime sooner than later. And thank you all for listening. Please hop over to stormskiing.com and subscribe to the Storm Skiing newsletter. You can also follow the Storm on X, Instagram, and YouTube at Storm Ski Journal. I have a stacked pod lineup coming your way and tons more content as well, even long after the snow melts. Until next time, stay well, stay safe. I'm Stuart Winchester, and I'll talk to you again very soon.
The Storm Skiing Podcast is a Quicksilver Films production.